In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. In the beginning, there was the urge and the call of Presbyterians in Saratoga to unite in one body. This resulted in our present church. The building and congregation we have today exists because in 1957, visions of this church were forming in the minds of several people. It became a reality with the help of Margaret Sorello's prayers and Dwight Caswell's experience in organizing and financing new mission churches.
In April of 1962, the Reverend John C. Stokes was called by the San Jose Presbytery to organize a mission church in Saratoga. Academically, he graduated from the University of California at Berkeley in 1951 and from Princeton Theological Seminary in 1954. Pastor Stokes, his wife Jean, and their 3 children, Sarah Lou, John, and Carolyn, came from College, Alaska, near Fairbanks, where he had served for 7 years as the pastor of the University Community Presbyterian Church.
On July 18, 1962, a coordinating committee was named with David Moss for outreach, Tony Sorello for Christian education, Reese Williams for building and planning, Dwight Caswell for stewardship, Dr. Edgar Smith for worship, and Ed Craig, member at large. All of them would be installed as the first set of elders on February 17, 1963, and along with Pastor Stokes to comprise our first church session.
On the evening of August 19, 1962, the first worship service was held at the Foothill Club with 44 worshipers in attendance. The next 2 Sunday evening services were held in the Los Gatos Arts Center on Austin Way. The first Sunday morning worship service was held there as well on September 9, 1962, with 69 persons present. But the congregation rapidly grew and needed a larger place to meet. So from November 4, 1962, until the church sanctuary was completed in 1966, the growing congregation went uptown and started holding services at the Saratoga Theater on Big Basin Way in the Saratoga Village.
In a theater?
Yes, in a theater, complete with the bright lights, refreshment counter, comfy seats, and, of course, the smell of popcorn. Mrs. Marguerite Otto, a charter member and deacon, was always nearby to make sure that things were done decently and in the Presbyterian way. So at the theater every Sunday morning, she rearranged the entryway and made it look as much like a church as possible, covering the candy counters with sheets, turning all of the movie posters over on their back sides, and setting up the communion table on the stage up front.
Church school started almost immediately with the Sorello children automatically enrolled. Attendance quickly grew to 30 children, not counting the dog. The kindergarten and junior age children met at the Saratoga Youth Center, which is now an antique shop. Thank heavens our Sunday school hasn't become antiquated. The church leadership felt it important for all ages to meet in weekly Bible study. Adult classes were held in many homes around Saratoga. The Craigs, Sorellos, and Swansons each took turns on Sunday mornings. The teenagers met at the Caswell home for breakfast and Bible study lessons taught by Dwight Caswell. There were also Bible studies at night at the Williams and Sarallo homes, taught by our pastor and others to round out our Christian education program. As the size of our youth classes rapidly grew, we began to use the Saratoga High School cafeteria across the street, the sanctuary itself, and our fellowship hall. Finally, all church school classes were brought onto the campus to fill out our new Christian education building, and each class had a room of its own, and the adults began to meet for their Christian education in the cozy fireside room.
On January 17, 1963, the property on which the church sits, some 5.4 acres across the street from the high school, was purchased for $78,000. That agreement took some doing by Reese Williams, who headed the building committee at that time. He had to get an agreement with Mr. Garcia, a local land developer and owner of the property, to sell us the land. The Articles of Incorporation as the Saratoga United Presbyterian Church were completed on March 15, 1963. Music was a very integral part of our worship service. In the fall of 1963, the Dottie and Bill Smith team opened for an overnight, long-running success. Dottie was our gifted organist and Bill was our choir director. They began their music ministry when we held worship services in the theater. Dottie played a pump organ and Bill directed the choir. When the sanctuary was later built, the choir sang from behind the railing in the front of the church. The organ, with Dottie at the console, was placed just to their right, behind the pulpit. From 1976 to 1978, a campaign was conducted for funds to acquire the Hillgreen Lane pipe organ from the First Presbyterian Church of San Jose. The organ committee, co-chaired by Bob Schlosserek and Orb Eshelman, ran a successful fundraising campaign to begin the process of making this vision become a reality. Architect Jim Moreland and organ builder Robert Newton were engaged to design the chambers and cantilevered choir loft to harmonize the sanctuary with this instrument that was originally built in 1906. It contains 34 ranks, 48 stops, and 2,149 pipes. Robert Newton and his assistant, Roger Inkpen, rebuilt the organ after the loft was completed. The organ was dedicated with a concert by Dottie Smith on March 12, 1978. The chimes were added later in memory of Allison Gregory. This brilliant instrument is a significant cultural part of the Saratoga community and is available for concerts and other musical events. The music you hear now is coming from this organ that is considered the finest in Northern California to this day. Along with the choir, both Dottie and Bill could regularly be seen on Sundays in the choir loft, making their angelic worship music from on high. On and off, we have had children's choirs as well as a bell choir to augment our music program.
Sunday, March 28, 1965, became a most significant day for us. The groundbreaking services were held for the permanent site of the Saratoga United Presbyterian Church. It was a short service. The apricot trees,
or were those prune trees?
The apricot or prune trees were in full bloom, as were the soft voices of the choir. After John Stokes broke the virgin ground with the congregation looking on, Reese Williams followed suit. John led the group in prayer, and all returned home with a feeling of great anticipation. The final design of the church was to be in the traditional form of the cross and rectangular in shape. Now work on the structure began in earnest. The building quickly took shape in spite of all the sidewalk superintendents, which comprised the majority of the congregation.
The first organ was purchased and installed up front behind the low wooden railing. Other furniture was built and installed, as well as the pulpit, the communion table, and the many pews. In August, the 4 large, handsome doors to the sanctuary were installed. The design and mosaics of each door were the creations of Mrs. Barbara Smith. Mr. Stuart Horton from Berkeley, a cousin of Barbara's, carved the wooden doors. The theme of the panel design is the Tree of Life. Each panel differs slightly in its treatment of the leaves and contains a mosaic of an early Christian symbol. From left to right, the symbols depict the creation, the incarnation, the crucifixion, and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end, thus saith the Lord. Barbara herself laid the mosaic tiles in each panel. Our church sanctuary was completed and dedicated on November 21st, 1965.
During the years of 1966 through 1971, the church membership grew to 423 communicants. True to Presbyterian policy of locating near schools, the children abounded. And it goes without saying, where you find the children, there also you will find the parents. As a result of this growing membership, we were in desperate need of Sunday school rooms, meeting rooms, and a place for fellowship. Again, it was necessary to raise funds for a new building. Reese Williams was called upon again to chair the committee for a multi-purpose building on the east side of the campus. This would include a large meeting room with a small kitchen and a larger room used for a nursery and other meetings. The building committee decided upon a 3,300 square foot building that would cost around $80,000. The social hall, as it was called then, was erected quite rapidly. So rapidly, in fact, that we don't have any pictures of it under construction. The work on the inside was completed by membership labor and in full use by 1969.
The summer of 1970 saw the first family affair, initiated by Carolyn Tompkins and organized by Kay Wiley and her committee. It ran for a week and replaced Vacation Bible School and provided an opportunity for all the family to study, pray, and play together. Family affair activities provided the opportunity to explore and develop skills in God-given talents not normally used. There were classes and workshops on furniture refinishing, stitchery, basket weaving, flower arranging, bicycle repair, calligraphy, welding, pickleball, auto repair, cake decorating, bridge, bell ringing, financial planning, tennis, horseshoes, men's chorus, computers and programming, hot air ballooning, tie-dyeing, aerobics, handwriting analysis, bread making, and just about anything else you can imagine to have fun.
It must have been difficult to choose just one activity for the whole week.
Yes, with so many choices, it was. But there was always next year's family affair to pick another one. And let's not forget the annual tug-of-war between the girls and the boys. Thanks to Mary Harper, Family Affair enjoyed a 12-year top box office run and had given each participant a new insight into themselves, their family, and their church.
Family Affair always kicked off with a good old-fashioned ice cream social where the ice cream was homemade right on the spot, a process that caused many a sore arm the next day. On the last day, there was an agape feast on the inner quad with tables heavily laden with a profusion of delectable food. Now that's a mouthful. The week-long Family Affair event culminated in one glorious show and tell either in Fellowship Hall, the sanctuary, or the courtyard. There we enjoyed seeing and hearing about everyone's labors enjoyed during the week. Nearly everyone became a participant, and the mood was one of fun, laughter, and hijinks. The theme of Family Affair one year was to supply canned goods for the city team family shelter. So who better to ask for donations throughout the week than Old Mother Hubbard?
Over the years, the church employed several part-time youth directors, including seminary intern student Tom Thomas, beginning in 1970, followed later by Peter Jessup, Art Van Beek, and Dave DeHaan. Sorry, those are the only ones whose pictures we have. In the fall of 1971, Carolyn Tompkins became our first director of Christian education. She worked endlessly and with no salary to build the program from scratch. She was followed in that position by Gene Stevens, Elaine Tennyson, and Bev Swanson to lead the Christian education of our children and youth.
On Sunday afternoon, September 5th, 1971, we lost our first pastor, Reverend John C. Stokes, due to a heart attack while working in his backyard. He had preached his first sermon that morning after getting back from his summer vacation. At the age of 49, he seemed healthy and well, and ready for all the fall activities that were to begin. Word of his untimely death spread through the entire congregation with shock and disbelief. He was a much-loved pastor, as well as a friend of many of the community. The memorial service was overflowing with his people and held on September 9th, 1971. The Reverends Frank Pinkard and John Turpin presided. For many months after this terrible loss, Elder Bruce Beebe led the congregation in worship and did so for many months along with pulpit supply. Bruce was followed by several interim ministers, the Reverends Albert Glass and John Caker. After 1.5 years of searching, the Reverend Claude V. Ponting was called from the First Presbyterian Church of Franklin, Pennsylvania. Claude preached his first sermon on March 5th, 1972. His wife, Betty Jean, and their 3 children, David, Susan, and Heather, arrived soon after. He was installed as our pastor on April 30th, 1972. Pastor Ponting initiated a weekly Christian education program for young people called the Youth Club. Starting after school, the youth groups met for worship, Bible study, recreation, service projects, and dinner. The dinner work crews were comprised of, who else? The students' mothers. The high school group, called High Times, engaged in many activities. Backpack trips to the Sierra, swim parties, Easter sunrise services at the Cerralos, and strenuous ski trips where night came early.
In February of 1973, our church celebrated its 10th anniversary with a real party. With no room of our own on the campus, it was held in Sacred Heart Church's recreational hall.
Now talk about being ecumenical.
There was a potluck dinner and an enormous anniversary cake baked by our very own Elaine Robinson and her steady helpers. There were lots of singing, skits, and speeches that night. Other congregational meetings and fellowship dinners became the norm over the years, even though we had to meet off campus in such places as Sacred Heart Church or in the high school cafeteria across the street. These dinners were a great way to include new people into our fellowship. The plight of the Vietnamese refugees prompted our church to sponsor the Nguyen family that was currently living at a Catholic Relief Services Refugee Center in Arkansas. On December 5th, 1975, the Nguyen family arrived here in Saratoga. Mother Tuet, grandmother Matt, 2 daughters, Twee and Jiao, and 4 sons, Ha, Hai, Tang, and Song. A committee was organized and led by Carl Myers, who was the chairman. Jan and Jerry Kiefer were part of this important mission committee to help the Nguyen family become self-sufficient and financially independent. It took just a little over a year to reach that goal. Everyone involved enjoyed the opportunity to give this family a chance to start over in America. The Lucases had a house that was available to rent. Church members pitched in to provide all the necessary furniture for this family of 8. A great deal of clothing was donated, as was the kitchen cookware and eating utensils. Countless others shopped for groceries and stocked the house. Finally, Mary Akita got the family signed up for welfare and helped the children register for public school. With our mission spirit so high from this experience, in February of 1980, we sponsored another Vietnamese refugee family, the Lam family, who had a baby girl, Mary Elizabeth Lam. Phuc Vinh Lam and her husband Van became members of our church shortly after their arrival. Within a year, they also became self-sufficient and very much a part of American life.
In November of 1977, Pastor Ponting gave notice of receiving a call with the Opportunity Presbyterian Church of Spokane, Washington. Pastor Rod Fridland was called as an interim minister, serving until we could find a permanent replacement.
In May of 1963, a women's association was formed with Margaret Serralo as president. There were 4 groups called circles that met regularly for Bible study and prayer. Once a month, a luncheon was held in the homes of members, but eventually moved to Fellowship Hall. Together, the circles supported mission work by serving the church, the community, and the world around us. The association members traveled twice a month to Agnew State Hospital to visit with the women residents and give them simple gifts such as soft, cuddly animals and baby dolls. They also washed and set hair, played games, sang songs, and celebrated birthdays. Most often, just sitting down to talk or taking short walks with them were sufficient to raise their spirits. Other activities of the association included studying and portraying the women of the Bible, as well as producing a lovely mother-daughter luncheon fashion show. The dresses and gowns that were worn came from the Happy Dragon store, a shop in Los Gatos that raises money for the Ming Kwang Children's Center.
In January of 1979, the Reverend James S. Hewitt was called to serve as our pastor, and he began his active service the following May. Pastor Hewitt, his wife Avis, and daughter Marie came to us from the Arcadia Presbyterian Church in Arcadia, California, where he had served for 9 years. They were immediately swept into church life and launched into family affair that very summer. In June of 1980, the Reverend Stephen Wing was called by session as our assistant pastor. He soon joined our ranks on August 15th, coming to us from the First Presbyterian Church of Lincoln, Kansas, where he had served as pastor for 2 years. In 1981, the congregation called Steve to become our associate pastor. In both positions, he brought to us a commitment to Christian education and youth groups. The church staff at that time consisted of Pastor Hewitt, Secretary Jean Gregson, organist Dottie Smith, Children's Ed Director Bev Swanson, Admin Assistant Jean Stokes Elder, and Steve Wing, Associate Pastor.
The 2x2s was started in 1981 by Vicki and Bruce Williams for young marrieds with young children. The group began as a social group, but added classes in Christian marriage and parenting as time went by. The early leaders were Don and Ruth Wyckoff, and then Tony and Margaret Serralo. At the other end of the spectrum was our 60-plus group, and of course, groups in between those ages. Another addition to our staff was Sherry McGaw, the one responsible for our annual Merry Christmas Children's Musical program. In the fall, she was seen rounding up children in grades 4 to 6, hoping to turn those creatures into the voices of angels. Young Mothers, the newest prayer group, made the Christmas stockings that were filled for our younger children in Sunday school. These mothers also kept our nursery clean and sanitary for the babies on Sunday mornings. Nancy Patton saw to the staffing for the special Mother's Day Out program.
The latest building addition to our church facilities started with a groundbreaking ceremony Sunday, February 17, 1981, 18 years to the day after our church was organized. Intended for Christian education, this building was named after our organizing pastor, the Reverend John C. Stokes. This milestone completed his dreams and that of the original church membership. Work began almost immediately with the grading and shortly afterward with the laying of the foundation and building of the walls. 1 year and 4 days after the ceremony, the John C. Stokes building was dedicated and occupied. We now have the facilities complete our plans of campus space for the Sunday school program, youth Christian development, adult education classes, and membership fellowship. This completes the history tour for our first 20 years of our church here in Saratoga. We hope you've enjoyed this short trip through memory lane, seen some familiar faces along the way, and can join us later when this history series of our church continues.